Well, welcome to the fall symposium of the Forum for Economy. And the topic might be even more important than a lot of topics we'd heard recently. The large investment package that was decided about half a year ago and brought about lots of controversial reactions and triggered lots of discussions, what might have been shifted back and forth, etc. By way of introduction, I would like to give you a perspective because lots of people here in the room followed the events, and the expert council said in 2013, with the right priorities, additional demands can be covered with the present revenues. That was the doctrine at the time, but this has to do with the fact that there were lots of arguments against larger investment needs in Germany. And if there was a greater need, the problem could be solved by reprioritizing. And now I jump ahead in time, and some of you also followed that. All of a sudden, people woke up and realized that in Germany, things are not running so smoothly, and that there is a backlog in investment, that lots of things no longer work. The railways, the schools, and the legendary school toilets that were always quoted, and the most renowned institute in Germany, the IW and the IMK, estimated an amount of 64 billion as 460 billion that was needed in Germany. Over a period of 10 years, they recalculated and found even greater needs and increased this amount to 600 billion. In the time afterwards, people considered how this can be realized within the legal framework of the debt brake and the balanced budget doctrine, etc. And several studies were carried out at the time. We also commissioned some of them. The idea of a special fund came up, not for the first time, but among other ideas, how we can deal with a situation without jeopardizing and abolishing the debt brake. And a reform of the debt brake was also envisaged, and that was an idea that matured over time, but it was not implemented. Investments were increasing from a very low level, but there were no drastic and considerable substantial changes. There was a consultant to a minister who extrapolated the trends from the 2013 study and expert opinion. And the conclusion was we don't need a great reform of the debt brake. But now, with new elections and the new majorities in parliament, a change was brought about in 2024, 2025. And some of you here in the room also contributed to promoting this idea. And then with the 2/3 majority for reform of the debt brake, momentum was created, and that was used for a new investment package, and the package was then approved on the 18th of March. All the figures will be shown again during our meeting. 500 billion in special funds, 100 billion for climate, 100 billion for the lenders, 300 billion for infrastructure, and 10% of the core budget are then earmarked for investments. There are certain exemptions, and there was also a limitation of the percentage of GDP. Now, a lot of press reactions followed suit. Here you see some of the headlines, missed opportunities, etc., were the reactions. And by the way, Mark, we didn't select this article just because you're in the room. Anyway, there is a title, this mega patch sheet can trigger a huge growth momentum. If that is possible, well, we will discuss it this afternoon. What is the situation? What can we expect? And how can we explain that to the public? Our first speaker who will focus on this is our moderator, and the first speaker is Steffen Meyer, who represents and substitutes for the Minister of Finance. So he will be our first speaker.
Ja, meine sehr
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Fricke, thank you very much, and I convey the greetings of Mr. Klingbeil, who wasn't able to come, and I have the honor to substitute for him and then give the first impulse speech here on the panel. You selected a topic for your symposium that is of utmost importance: 500 billion special fund for infrastructure and climate neutrality. With what you already showed here, the federal government, compared to previous years, made a paradigm change in financial and fiscal policy with a financing and funding package in the special fund for infrastructure and climate neutrality and defense, and a certain flexibility in debt incurring by the federal states. You created an important package, and the objective is to bring our country back on track towards growth. For the current year, the investment amounts to 115 billion for the Federation. These are record investments, and the trend in coming years will be even higher. And if you compare that with the previous year, it's about 40 billion more, and for 2026, it's 120 billion investment alone triggered by the federal state. Now, if you look at these figures, also of the need for investment, it's clear that public investment alone is not sufficient, but a basis has to be created that private investment can actually be increased considerably. The special fund is an integral part of the comprehensive fiscal policy agenda of the federal government. It consists of three priorities, basically. First of all, investment. Secondly, reform, and thirdly, consolidation. And I would like to briefly focus on these 3 points. First of all, we are investing at a very high level. Why do we have to do that? In recent years, we saw failures to invest in public infrastructure. There is a backlog in investment in the road and rail network, in the data and wireless networks that are not as reliable as we want them to be, and the dilapidated school buildings frustrate people in their everyday lives. The need for public investment amounts to several hundred billion euros, and in the context of the discussion about the special fund, you can understand that. It sounds a very large amount, but if you distribute it over the years, it is only a start. And going beyond this special fund, we have to see to it that we will continuously make high public investment. The basis of the financing package was established by the federal government when the old majorities were still present in Parliament. Roads, schools, hospitals, digitalization, and climate protection are the priorities. What is important? is that the special fund will be covering 12 years, and with that we create a planning certainty that all these investments are fully funded and all the stakeholders can prepare for it and can plan the respective capacities. You said it, we have 3 pillars in the special fund, 100 billion for the Climate and Transformation Fund, 100 billion going to the lender, particularly with respect to the need for financing the local authorities. 2/3 of the investment are made on the local level, and then there is another pillar of 300 billion for federal funds that is used for other investments that also benefit the lender and the local authorities. This is an important point, and you also pointed that out. The investment ratio in the core budget this year and in the entire fiscal planning period is greater than 10%. And this is exactly the limit that is established in the basic law as a legal definition for additionality. That is, we have to stick to the 10% investment ratio in the core budget, and then the additionality of the special fund is justified and secured. In addition to that, the financial flows to the lender are stipulated, and this is the only way, and this is the contribution of these investments, we can lay the first foundation for improving the profitability and the competitiveness of companies, and thus secure investment from them. Central insight by the government is that only through growth the sustainability of public finances can be ensured in the long term, and the new special fund makes a very important contribution to that. What is of central importance here in this context, and some startup funding was made with the 500 billion, we now have to create efficient spending measures for these funds. So we will have to closely scrutinize and monitor the situation. You all know, with the 100 billion for the lender, a certain need for administrative agreements is there, because it's important to get data and information on the federal level in order to see whether the lender have used their leeway, which they rightly have, in a good way in order to decide what money has to be spent on lender level and what on local levels. We have a good administrative agreement, and the second element is that we will have to scrutinize also the 300 billion for the federal level. Mr. Klingbeil has agreed with the other ministries that they carefully carry out profitability analyses for all the items in the special funds, and they develop indicators that assess the targets and the success of these measures. So the targets are established, and we can then have a very transparent approach over months and years to demonstrate what we actually do with these funds. When we listed all these items, we saw to it that also the assessments and the estimates for the years are designed in a way that we don't only look at prices.
Im Rahmen der Infrastrukturbestand Schiene. Wir haben 10-12 Diskussionen mit Verkehrsministerium, mit der Bahn.
The railway is a very important part of our infrastructure system. We've had various different discussions with railway representatives, how we're going to invest. The investment curve went up rather sharply, and then over the recent years it slowed down. But we simply have to make sure that there is not going to be a complete cut. We spoke a lot to the civil engineering companies in order to find out what the capacities are we really able to deliver it with without having to increase prices significantly. So preparation is very well underway. Monitoring has to be carried out very precisely. Our minister set up a council for investment and monitoring exactly for that reason, because there we have special experts for particular areas in that council who can do the monitoring in order to find out where, according to planning right, where in the field of the reduction of red tape, more steps need to be taken in order to be able to move into the right direction. Mr. Fricke, you made mention of this already. A couple of words on the discussion concerning the particular station. I think we really need to remember which role Mr. Weizsäcker and Mr. Hüther play in this particular context. I had the privilege of being able to participate in the discussions here and there. As the permanent Undersecretary of State coming from the Ministry of Finance, I always alluded to the coalition agreement and the gaps in our household. We started off after the failure of the traffic light government, and we had to begin by setting up a budget. But there was a lack of funding with regards to the action that needed to be taken. 25 to 30 billion were missing. And the main objective was that we tried to answer the foreign question. The aggression of Russia against Ukraine, how can we equip ourselves in the appropriate manner and therefore increase our defense spending as a very important sign to be sent out, and in order to increase our defense capabilities, number one. And the second challenge in this particular regard was that certain funds had to be removed from public funding in order to be earmarked for defense. This is what led to the amendment of our basic law, and this was really supported by all the different parties in the National Parliament. Mrs. Paus is here from the Green Party, and the most important question was, where do you set investment priorities and the core budget? 8, 9, 10 or 12%. And then we ended up with an investment ratio of 10% at the national level. And against this backdrop, we always had to ask ourselves, what is going to happen with the special fund? How can we use it in order to support the structural changes which are needed? 9 billion in 25, slight increase exceeding 10 billion per year that will follow. And these are particular items from the core budget which were transferred to the special fund for technical reasons, because the budgetary regulations in Germany would not allow you to use the same items in the core budget as well as in a special fund. It's a technical specificity. And of course, if you want to do it right, you want to have one single line item only in the budget, but we had to do it this particular way. Then all the other expenses and the expenditures are part of the additional fund. The Climate Transformation Fund will be equipped with 10 billion every year, and they will be earmarked for special expenditures only and exclusively. We have set up the Climate and Transformation Fund in a stable manner. The current government has done so. And we also have global minority spendings of 3% of the programmed expenses. We have calculated that this is not going to incur an additional deficit. We are positioned in a rather stable manner. At the federal state level, we've got to take a really close look. There are some add-ons, similar to the manner in which I described it at the national level, with structural deficits. If particular municipalities had particular intentions with their budgetary processes, but if they were not able to make these necessary investments, they can use the particular funds that we are now going to allocate to them. And with these kinds of funds, they can make these investments. And I do personally hold the view that this is an add-on. And if you take the entire package together, then we will see that the discussions about potential obstacles should be done away with, because we have managed to reach a high level of planning certainty. We've reached an investment ratio in the core budget which exceeds 50 billion. This is the total amount for investments. Now let's take a look into the future. How can they be used in the most possible manner? Now give me 2 more minutes in order to mention Pillar 2 and Pillar 3 of the strategy. After the investments, we need to carry out reforms and we need to bring about a process of consolidation in order to contribute to boost the growth conditions in Germany. Now, with regards to structural changes, a lot has to be done. The most prominent example is the investment booster that was implemented by the national government. It's a possibility to write off particular investments, which is quite a unique feature. So if the companies are profitable, more investments can be made. We improve the research subsidy. We will do much more in the field of electromobility. And we take major efforts in order to come up with more competitive energy prices for the experts in the group. We try to extend the electricity grid, and industrial electricity price is supposed to be introduced because somebody coming from a third country to Germany has to overcome 17 different obstacles, and especially in a country which is very much affected by climate change, other difficulties need to be overcome, but we've got to take action rapidly in order to make a major contribution to the well-being of the state, especially against the backdrop of demographic developments. Third point, despite the possibilities that we have and which have already been mentioned, we need to approve of the 2 budgets which were set up for 2026 and 2025 as quickly as possible. We also need to zoom in on the budgets 24, 27, 28 and 29. Here expectations are particularly high, and the national government has to bring about more consolidation because we need long-lasting, enduring growth. According to the tax estimates that we recently received, we were told that if growth rates increase, this will have a major impact on the entire economic situation. Persons who today receive what we call the citizens' money or basic benefits if new jobs are being created, these persons can find a job and therefore we can also take care of the ZEIT of expenditure. That's just one point. Another point which is very important in the course of the discussion relates to an issue that we have to deal with in the next 2 or 3 months to come. With regards to the national government, the national budget needs to be approved of. And we need to focus more on cause and effect. At least 5 billion of the year 2027 are going to be cut in costs in the year 2027. Financial aid, tax relief measures, and additional instruments will have to be used in order to bring costs down. So there is a high pressure to bring about a process of consolidation, but the national government is really working hard on that. So I'd like to leave it at that for the time being. I hope I didn't speak for too long, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion. Thank you very much, Steffen Meyer. Let's start off with the discussion. And let me give each of you the possibility to make a short introductory statement, one by one. Mrs. Herntier, you're here, you're the mayor of the beautiful city of Spremberg. What is your take on this? For us in the city, it means 6.6 million euros in addition for investments. And that is what we're going to use in the most effective and efficient manner. We have an industrial park that was built, a power plant. You all know about the details. We are in an energy crisis. The electricity prices went up erratically, and a municipality like Spremberg is hit particularly hard the 6.6 million euros will nevertheless be needed most urgently, because it has not always been like this. And we don't want a tax like SPREMBERG having to levy high trade tax, especially since we're located in Alsatia, which is very much affected by structural change. And we didn't manage to bring that process through as originally anticipated. This is why we have an investment deficit of 8 million, a city with less than 22,000 inhabitants. That's quite considerable, don't you think? Due to the trade tax revenues, commercial tax revenues, we can do away with this investment deficit. And what are we doing? We are building a new school, an extended building costing 30 million, or well, no, we can't actually do that because we don't get any money for that. We lack the investment. The same holds true for many other investments, especially in certain parts of our city. With regards to the commercial tax revenues, a lot has been delegated to the district, just as is the case in all the districts and municipalities in the federal state of Brandenburg. But since we are a city with less than 27,000 inhabitants, 57% of the budget has to be delegated to the county. And you can imagine what this means. What happens if the commercial tax revenues from the industrial park and the energy sector go over to the county level? This is quite difficult. So a city like Spremberg needs the 6.6 million most urgently. What are we going to do with that money? Well, we can't actually make more than we have done in the past because we have an investment deficit of 8 million, which was generated over a couple of several years. So we will complete one project, which is a project for sports facilities and education, because we want to show the citizens, it is possible for us to bring things to a successful ending. We are not stuck in work in progress all the time. And it's also the task of the national government to support rural areas such as Spremberg. I always have to take into account that something will be delegated to certain parts of town, all the rural areas surrounding the city. There are some aspects that we have to take into mind because we want to get done. We don't only want to get things started, but we want to get done. And that is what we have to take into account in Spremberg. But people always tell me, well, don't you worry, you've got very high tax revenues. But after the budgetary negotiations, I had a closed-door meeting with our people from the administration because I was wondering, how can we adopt the new budget or the next two budgets? Because I know what to expect. I know all the different aspects which need to be factored in. I know about the very particular situation in the federal state of Brandenburg. So we urgently need that money, but in addition, nothing else is what we expect to be receiving in Spremberg. And therefore, we are very happy about this special fund with the 6.6 million. But the per capita average amount is not really enough because we're not considered to be a community in trouble.
Since 2014, I have been a mayor in Spremberg. Before that, Germany did away with nuclear energy, and we had to pay back double-digit amounts of millions. And then after the lignite stop, we had to pay back 17 million, and we were left alone. And now the tax for the rich is decided, and then perhaps commercial tax will have to be paid back. And the local authorities are alone confronting this situation. Automatically, they can no longer pay benefits and they have to increase limits. It's good that we have these measures, but this does not resolve the financial problems of the local authorities. Thank you very much. So the point was that decisions on the federal level have an impact on your level, and you will have to deal with the problems. Lisa Paus from the Green Party. There was a great debate among the Green Party regarding the new financial package. You agreed to it. Would you do it again? Well, we agreed to a change and an amendment of the basic law, and we are convinced that Germany needs a change of the basic law, and we also need another reform of the debt brake. This is only a special fund amounting to 500 billion for 12 years. But if we look at the present budget, where we excluded the railroad investments, then they will be over after 12 years because they're part of the special fund now. And you can imagine what problems we will face then. So we need a permanent solution. It was good to approve the change of and amendment of the basic law, but we're suffering when we see the implementation by the federal government. The Council of Economic Experts, among others, have calculated that a lot of money has been wasted because this money is not used for additional investment. And the order of magnitude is so great that the Council of Experts said it's less than half of the growth we could have achieved if the additional investment could have been realized. So until 2030, it's not 4.5% additional growth, but less than 2%. Specifically for next year, it means that 1/3 of the growth next year will be due to the fact that we have more working days and fewer holidays, and that the overall impact of the special fund is less than 1%. We heard from the ministry that there were problems and that we are on the right track. Okay, but it's bitter to see that we have a massive problem when it comes to competitiveness of Germany as an industrial location, and we have lots of transformation needs. So everything we don't do now to re-establish competitiveness will cause additional problems regarding competitiveness in the future. So it's not only a little bit less growth or considerably less growth, but we're also risking our ability to transform. And the new government is now also challenging the climate goals. So we don't only have problems now, we have to look at climate transformation and green hydrogen, etc. All this isn't happening at the moment, and that is why we're suffering on the federal level. It has been said, well, this is what we did, and now we have to implement it. You pointed out it's not the 12% as in the last budget. We had higher revenues than, but this is not the only thing you did. Of the 12%, you went down to 10%, but you also used all the other tricks in the budget. For example, investments from the defense budget that are counted among exemptions are also added to the basic budget. The definition of investment was changed. So for special funds, investments are also accepted that are not regular investments. It's good that we can now finance social research, etc., but we also finance HR expenses that are all of a sudden a part of the budget. And in the lender and the local authorities, additional funds will not be dispersed, and oil pipelines are considered investments in the Climate and Transformation Fund, and this hurts. You didn't only repair and remedy some of the problems, but in addition, you made presents to your voters. And the investment booster is something that was necessary. Yes, the economic activity component is important in an economic crisis, for example, special write-offs, etc. But reducing the corporate tax as of 2028 is not such a good measure. Other taxes, for example, more taxes for rich people, need to compensate for that. And then the restaurant tax or the mother pension are additional gifts to voters. This has nothing to do with streamlining the budget. It has to do with rewards for your voters. And a special party from the south, the regional party, brought this up. And this doesn't only cost additional money to the coalition, but it costs us our future on the federal level. So that is why we did not agree to the budget, but to the amendment. Well, Mr. Truger, you are always very critical. What is your first step in stock taking? Well, I'm very happy that we commented on the special fund, and we also studied it and carried out simulations and worked extra time for that. This is a very good step considering what the expert opinions of the German Council of Economic Experts usually are. Previous opinions were not always so positive, and the strategy of the majority in the council has always been that there are certain times when you have carry out these additional steps. Now we acknowledge the special funds, and our calculations look quite positive. If you completely spend these funds for investment, that is €1 in investment will bring about 1.5 or 1.8 euros in additional GDP. With defense spending, it doesn't look quite as rosy. It's maybe €1 generates 50 cents, but Lisa Paus already quoted the figures. If this was completely additional funding, 4.5% to 5% additional GDP could be achieved, but now the achievement will probably be less. My personal opinion is that all the points Lisa Paus listed are correct, or many of these points are correct. For example, I think I'm being manipulated from both sides. Well, so the manipulation in the defense spending with the ratios, nobody denies or challenges that there is no complete additionality. We can achieve about 50%. You could dispute the details, but the spending structure is not completely investment-oriented. Shifting parts of development aid will not have a growth effect in Germany. This is the criticism that we have to acknowledge. But the question is, what is unjustified criticism? Lisa Paus did not mention these unjustified criticisms, but there are some people who say huge debt is incurred, and then the investment content of these credits is low. But this is not serious calculation. You calculate debt that comes, for example, from defense spending and then compare it to other investment. Nobody said that defense spending is an investment. And people who advocated for this exemption of defense now criticize the overall concept, and this is not fair. From our perspective, there is a good justification to incur additional loans for stabilizing economic activity and balance budgets, because they were burdened by the crisis and there were huge gaps in the budgets, and a certain transition time is needed to balance them out. What is tragic at the moment is that part of the limited special funds that were earmarked for investment are now used for filling these gaps. That the government has done this is something that we do not necessarily have to criticize them for, because otherwise we would have considerable budget cuts. And how can you manage that without taking additional special funds? At the end of the legislative period, the financial package will have generated 1.5% additional percent in GDP. And if you technically calculated, the potential growth would also be increased by that amount. This is good per se. And simulations point out that it would be nice to use additional funds for investment. But the fundamental problem that the budget wasn't covered, that there were huge gaps, and this has to be tackled, for example, by further reforming the debt brake. And what the mayor said is correct. Some things go wrong in the debate. If you only talk about loans and special funds repairing and remedying the situation. And this is not always the debt brake that we need. We need a profound reform of the financial system regarding public spending. And it's not only special programs we can use to keep the local authorities alive. The local authorities would have to have systematic support to do what they want to do, and then democracy is also in a better situation. Well, local authorities are an exciting, separate subject, but we don't have to discuss about the legal aspects of the budget and the new transformation. But the exciting question is, investment doesn't go one-on-one. It's used for consolidation sometimes, and the fund is not disappearing in a black hole. But if that money wasn't used for this purpose, other budget cuts would have to become necessary. So the question I like to ask is, how problematic is it in the present situation? Would we be in a better position if 100% of the funds had been used for investment, and on the other hand, we would have 100% hard budget consolidation? Or is this mix also following a certain rationality that isn't necessarily political rationality?
I think the technical answer is, of course, the investments have a major effect. Our ideal scenario, of course, would have been pushed down significantly, but something would have been left. So it would have triggered to a positive growth effect. That is the technical detail. But on the other hand, all those who are getting excited now, or getting nervous now, and I don't mean Lisa by that, they might be wondering, where could this extra money have come from? Where would additional cuts have been possible? And before the coalition had started, I think this would have torn the whole system apart. I'd like to refer to that by making the following statement. The Basic Law amendments took place before the new government came into power. And what Mark is saying is completely right. Without the amendments of the Basic Law, the new government could not have come to power because it would not have been able to set up a budget. With regards to citizens' money, which is a legal which is legally subjected to particular regulations, 25 to 30 billion, which cannot really be brought about and cannot be really filled with life under these conditions. But Mrs. Paus said, well, we've got an investment quota of 12% under the previous government, amounting to 12% are part of the financial plan. But investments to that amount would never have become materialized. But, you know, disposable income is how this would have been classified, and this would have been the money for investment. So the 12% would never have been achievable because the previous government was not in a position to deal with all the problems that existed. Same holds true for the climate and transformation funds. The funds that had been fictitiously made available did not really exist in reality. So it had not really been finalized in finance or funded. You spoke about, mother pension, VAT in retail and catering. You criticized that justifiably so, but my minister, if he was here today, he would say a coalition agreement that you jointly entered into is always based on a compromise, you see. The minister as such would not have selected these particular tools and instruments, but as you know, they were one of the preconditions for the amendment to our basic law. Last statement, I fully agree that we need a new type of a debt break in order to be sure that at the end of the special fund, we can use additional financial leeway in order to continue to make further public investments. What I would like to say is when we planned the special fund, we proceeded as follows. We looked at inventory, inventory repair of bridges, roads, so that the funds that we want to allocate for that particular purpose will go down in the special fund. In the explanatory notes to the special funds, we already indicated that the investment figure is going to go up in the core budget because we don't want investments to be brought to a complete standstill. So we think we have a very reliable plan which now needs to be implemented. And let me repeat once again, with a view to the future, the question is, how can these funds really be used appropriately for road construction, digitization and the like, so that we will actually be able to reach the growth rates that we try to achieve? Lisa Paus. Yes, thus he once again confirmed that this part of the coalition agreement, which will turn out to be really expensive, because here we don't talk about 1, 2 or 3 billion, but 10 or 15 billion on an annual basis, which will or have become necessary due to these particular measures. And due to a Bavarian regional party, they've been included in the agreement. And potentially speaking, this will take us exactly into this particular direction. And this is why we were in great difficulties. I think that you justifiably spoke about the monitoring measures and so on. I'm the chairperson of the budget committee, but here it has not yet played a very significant role. We did not really speak about the way in which these investments can be implemented. We know that in the field of construction, speedily processes are supposed to be introduced, but this does not really mean that planning capacities at the local level and with regards to HR can be made available in order to see to it that this will actually happen. Now, if you do your math correctly, in the core budget, we have a level below 10%. I mean, of course, there is a little bit of leeway compared to the previous government, but here we are really below 10%. And that's part of the plan. It has never, ever worked out, because we did something like a front loading. But, investments can never really be made in that particularly exact and precise manner because we don't have a concept in line with that based on new tools, because the planning period needs to be initiated rather soon in order to make investments and start building. And, I'm not in the know, but it would be very nice if you could tell me more about it. I haven't seen this so far, and others haven't seen this either. Of course, the Economic Institute anticipate and expect that this will have a secondary effect and that the growth expectations in the next few years will have to be lowered because everything needs to be implemented. And I don't know where the planning capacities are supposed to come from. And we don't have all the concepts in our drawers that we simply have to pull out and implement them. Let me react to that, if I may, because you are the chairperson of the Budget Committee and you have just approved the budget 2026 where the investment rate exceeds 10%. It's at 10.5% more or less. I don't know whether, according to the budgetary regulations, the demarcation, which has been in existence for years, can be put into question. I think for the purpose of the discussion today, we should use these possibilities just to make that clear. The quota for investments will exceed 10%. And the Budget Committee also set in place a measure. We in the national government and my minister are particularly in favor of of that, because in the next couple of years we will have to report to you in order to tell you how the special fund was used, because we want to monitor success. We want to be as transparent as we can, which is in our own interest, not only in the executive, but also the legislators need to be able to see in detail what exactly happened. And under your chairpersonship, the Budget Committee approved of that. Yes, that's absolutely true. I already mentioned the 10%, but I put them into question from a technical viewpoint. I'm also the rapporteur of my parliamentary group for construction and building. And, you know, these things, of course, take time. This is nothing of the extraordinary, but we have had some remaining budgetary line items left over from the previous years. How can this be done away with? How can we make sure that money for investments can be used rather quickly? The Ministry for Construction told us, well, this requires a pool of different measures, and we try to facilitate these processes as much as we can, but nothing concrete has been put on the table. Thus, the problem has not yet been resolved. Now let me come in and then I'll try to hold myself back. We have the construction tower, which was entered into in order to speed up developments in this regard, taking major steps forward in order to build more homes. And we are about to adopt the Infrastructure Future Act, building up on that. With regards to planning and approval rounds, the previous government has already made major progress, and we want to take further steps ahead. With regards to the refurbishment of bridges with not only 4 lanes but 6 lanes is something which is already on our agenda. No additional environmental feasibility studies will be required. No planning processes in detail will be required, but the Infrastructure Act will include all the measures for investments in the special funds, and they will be given utmost public priority. What does it mean? Well, the authorities and the courts, if these things are being put into question, can rule that these projects need to be pushed ahead and be advanced. This will accelerate the processes. I think we shouldn't get lost in the details, because, you know, these are measures of reducing red tape, which are urgently required in this context. Well, you asked for the floor. Well, it's a bit difficult for me, you know, because there are 3 political heavyweights sitting beside me at the national level. They have always been discussing and negotiating with each other. And I normally have a budget of more than 60 million, and the 6.6 million in addition from the special fund will also be allocated to us in SPREMBERG. We already made mention of the fact that structural changes are of the essence. And here we do not talk about the absolute figures about the money only, but, and you made mention of this in the course of a previous statement, the money also needs to be spent. You have to invest money into the rails or onto the roads. We need to build more, and there is a great deficit that we are facing. In the course of structural changes, we try to exert an influence as strong as we can, but over the last 5 or 6 years, we are in trouble. The entire Alsatian region gets 17 billion. I applied for a project in 2020, which costs 3.2 million, but we have not yet even started, because it drives us crazy to think about the number of rules and regulations that we've got to adhere to. You know, public tendering, it's a construction project, but we in Lusatia thought to ourselves, well, come on, this is something which is urgently required in Lusatia, but also in other parts of Germany. We have to accelerate the process. So we took some initial steps, and hopefully on the 16th of December, we will get the approval for the Net Zero Valley, for the first Net Zero Valley in Europe, for the business community. But, you know, we need that too. People always tell us, speed up, become faster, but we get slower and slower, and it will become ever more difficult for me to use the 6.6 million in the appropriate manner and spend them fast, spend them quickly. If we receive the funds next year, well, if we're doing a good job, we will have spent it by 2028. That's how things work. Because, you know, there is a first level with the first legal auditors, then the local authority representatives, then the federal state reps. They always have to double check and monitor everything. And this ties up a lot of HR capacity that could be used much more effectively and efficiently in other areas, you see. A very important topic in this context is how about these additional subsidies? In all the local municipalities, you will hear that there is a problem with applying for additional subsidies. This is a message that we didn't receive very well. Now let us participate more from tax revenues and give us more money and move away from these old distribution mechanisms that nobody's really able to understand. Well, this is a very interesting conflict. On the one hand, you want to have a very good monitoring system in place in order to know what the money is spent on, but the more monitoring you have, the more legal provisions need to be adhered to and complied with, and this may cause problems for spending activities. But you spoke of approval processes. In your region, is there a lack of capacities in the construction industry, or do you have what you need? When you get these 6.6 million, and if you can spend that money without too much red tape, do you have the companies on site? Do they have the right capacities to build? Or are the prices too high, or will there be further delays? Well, the construction industry and the craftsmen, oh well, I could talk about this for the entire evening. It's not too long ago that we received alternative offers with astronomical prices, or no offers at all, no proposals at all, no bids. Or you're expected to fulfill particular conditions which simply cannot be fulfilled. And then, you know, the economic development went down. There were first problems, and there was a problem in the city council because people said, well, the city needs to do everything in its power in order to see to it that local craftsmen will finally get the necessary orders, and we have to have new public tender procedures, otherwise we'll all go bankrupt. But now, you know, the situation is going up, the situation improved, and we're starting all over again. And that is totally unacceptable. So therefore, I don't really understand, or I cannot really answer your question. But the 6.6 million will be spent on construction, and also the 33 for the school, mind you. But here you really have to be rather careful. I think there is too much lobbyism involved in this regard, also at the local level, at the bottom. People complain, they lament, they say that everything's really bad. They show everything in a doomy light. They're never really responsible for what happened to them, but at the end of the day, there is a city administration or the city council that you can blame and that he can ask for anything and everything. And I think we have the capacities that are needed, at least in SPREMBERG. I took a closer look at this over the last couple of days. I looked at what happened in the past because I'm the rapporteur in charge of this particular area. And it's true to say that over the last 4 or 5 years, the construction industry declined by 25%. There was a significant drop, 25%. And this is why I was also concerned that there is a lack of capacities. I think some capacities were probably done away with, but we still have a lot of people there who are capable of doing this. But we only have a special fund, and there has been a lot of fund loading, and people can also do their estimates, anticipating that it will take 5 or 6 years before the funds are being made available. You know, to have to get things going before people know that it really be worth it to build up capacities in the long run. But apart of that, you try to get offers and increase prices.
So it is so dramatic that there is a weakness in growth. There was a survey among banks and savings banks, and they looked at the construction industry and found that as general growth is so low, they also estimate that the risk for insolvencies will further increase, and that they haven't touched rock bottom yet, and that there are psychologies and momentums that create a situation that in conurbations, rents are increasing and housing is scarce, but no construction follows, and the risk is that prices eat up everything and the growth momentum will not materialize. I would like to add to that, you have to, of course, differentiate between civil engineering and housing construction. But what is also important is that when we look at annual analysis, one of our teams checked whether an investment campaign of new investment, first of all, impacts prices or actually changes the situation. The result was encouraging because in spite of a fiscal shock, a large share of the investment will actually reach the target and does not simply increase prices. But all the present developments haven't been considered. But in the past, the assessment was correct. I would like to follow up on this. We expect a real growth of 1.3% on the level of the federal government. What we do with the exception, an exemption is 0.6 or 0.7. Now, after the growth impulse next year, the fiscal impulse of the public sector turns into an economic upswing. So we have to pacify the situation, we have to create planning certainty, and after record increases in wages and salaries, citizens put more money in the bank and entrepreneurs start investing. If we achieve that, we establish the basis for what I pointed out in the beginning of my statement. For several years, we have to have constant growth. We will have impulses by the public sector, but the others have to join and follow suit. If that is successful, then we can really make progress. And a lot of the issues that concern us at the moment, for example, commercial tax revenue, will look completely differently, because also on the local authority level, you will have more leeway. How much time do we still have? Well, until 4:15. So maybe we take some questions from the audience. Please keep your questions short and don't make additional statements, because otherwise we don't have enough time for that. I looked at what is included in the special fund, and I read employment and growth impulses. That is a very vague term. To me, it sounds like subsidies, but it's a question of arguments. Can you simply give people 1,000 euros, or can you create real growth? What is actually the growth impulse? Thank you very much. It's a question to Achim Truger. The Council of Economic Experts placed a lot of importance on the additionality, but the multiplier is surprisingly low. I don't see 1.5 to 1.7, or is the additionality only a legal additionality and not an effective additionality, looking at the actual situation? A euro that is planned but isn't then financially supported doesn't have any impact. I also have a question. You said planning certainty, growth for the future. I have just founded a small company, and for us, the question is important. What makes the future certain when it comes to planning? And climate, AI, and automation, and war, and social coherence are the most important burning issues that make it difficult for us to predict the future. Now, what you presented sounded to me that the money is placed on some massive investment projects, and people hope for a trickle-down effect. And labor as a distribution tool is increasingly less important. Well, I answer the first question. Special fund, and it's sounding like subsidies. But this is not what it is. The special fund, if you want to translate it, is to be used to do away with the refurbishing and repair backlog in Germany. For example, railroads. For years and years, we haven't thoroughly repaired the railway. So our trains are increasingly late and not reliable. And in the next 10 to 15 years, we have to catch up on investment there. And then it has a tangible effect for citizens. Trains will run on time again. So this is not a subsidy, it's direct public investment. And I would like to come back to what you just said. You talked about planning certainty, and you're right. There's a number of developments, particularly the geopolitical developments with the Russian aggression in Ukraine and also a Russian president that is difficult to predict, and that this is an obstacle for planning certainty and is a burden on companies when it comes to the question whether they want to invest or not. And this federal government will not change its target to become climate neutral by 2045, but it reassesses how to get there. When we see now that the development is slower when it comes to saving energy, we adjust the approaches in order to avoid excessive public spending. Regarding AI, we're in a pretty good position, but we have to see to it that we get AI into companies, and we have to see in the world of labor what the growth sectors are, what the most important sectors are. In Germany, the industrial sector is in a very good position, and it's worth every job that we struggle to maintain this positive situation. We saw the additionality of 50%, and the investment orientation is not very high either. So the share of expenditure with this high multiplier is not so great either. There is a graph that illustrates the different shares, and here the ratio is relatively low, and we are less optimistic when it comes to disbursement of funds. The disbursement is usually pretty slow. But the simulation is not a forecast. We just look at differences with respect to the reference scenario. I can imagine if fiscal policy is more expensive and with respect to underutilization, certain measures are taken, this would create a certain thrust that is greater than we assessed in our forecast. I'd like to briefly follow up on this. Maybe my impression is wrong, but next year we'll have a very special financial situation. There is this impulse for limited parts of our economy, for example, construction, and then we have the rest of the economy. And if all these savings packages materialize, we will have a more restrictive approach. We might have economic activity in construction, but we might have reductions in the social systems and in other parts of the sectors. So we have a limited boom, and we don't know how to deal with it regarding fiscal policy. Well, it depends on the budget for 2027, I think. The coalition reallocated another 10 million to 2027, so the pressure to save is not so great as with the 30 billion. So the special fund for infrastructure and climate protection is public investment. I would have liked to see that it's not only called climate neutrality, but that the targets are also called climate neutrality, but they're only competitiveness, etc. But what is correct is that the Climate and Transformation Fund is meant to support industry and industrial transformation. But I already pointed out, unfortunately, there are subsidies. They're undeniable. The industrial electricity price and other measures show this. So I would have liked it that these were real investments in climate protection. But of course, there are support measures for industry as well. Well, for 2026, there is a strong impulse, and what happens in 2027 is not clear yet because of the shift. The situation is slightly more relaxed for the federal government, but there are gaps amounting to 55 or more than 60 billion. Now, if that was balanced by cuts, this would be a restrictive impulse. And then it would destroy a lot of good developments. So the perspective is important. I would like to add, we already discussed the expert opinion. There is a difference regarding the assumption for growth, 0.9 of the Council and 1.3 of the government. And this is explained by the smaller disbursement of the special fund. And to me, that was a relief because the disbursement ratio will be higher, and that is why the impact on growth will be higher. If we don't have other influencing factors, we will see higher growth. And I would like to mention that what this is about is that the public spending will then also influence in private investment, in investments in the private sector. So additional elements have to be created that make this possible. And then we have a self-supporting economic upswing and not an economic upswing that requires further support. I'm not sure whether you can say this is the only difference. I looked at the overall diagnosis. It's also at 1.3 and 0.2% is from external factors and 0.1 from private consumption. So the situation is not so easy. With a fiscal package, a great impact is possible, but exports don't follow suit. Exports actually reduce the overall growth, and that is very difficult to assess and to separate. Yeah, if things are running well, they run well, and if not, we don't know what happens. I think this is the end of the first session. It was an exciting panel discussion with interesting insights, and now we have a coffee break.